This is usually the point where I say that there's new merch, but there is no new merch because I had an idea, but I didn't feel right doing it without first asking permission of you and a listener of the show. So
Okay.
I was thinking about turning, ripped and shirtless Bill. I was thinking of turning that into a shirt. But I need to know if you're comfortable with that, and I need to know if the listener is comfortable with us using his artwork. What are your thoughts?
Only if the bird gets on it as well. The bird that I'm carrying.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. We come as a team.
You come as a team. You're inseparable. It's like it's your daemon. It's like the Golden Compass.
Yeah.
If the listener, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. It's been a whole month since we recorded. But if you listener are okay with putting ripped and shirtless, your artwork, ripped and shirtless Bill, on a t-shirt, we might show you a t-shirt like for free, just as a thank you, because it's hilarious. So let us know, email, Reddit, that sort of thing, and it should be there in the new year.
What about ripped and shirtless Edgar?
That seems really narcissistic. Like,
It's more narcissistic for you than it is for me.
There's this manager in football called Brendan Rodgers, right?
Okay.
And Brendan Rodgers, he's a really good manager, but lots of people don't really like him because he's very, very, very into himself. And I think he did some sort of, or there was a documentary made about him. And like the film crew went about his house, and he has loads of pictures of himself, like on his walls, like paintings of him. And it seems really weird for a person to either create or order like an image of themselves for public consumption. That seems weird to me. Whereas I have no problem, making stuff with you on it for public consumption, because that's different. I don't know.
I think it has to be an all or nothing thing, man.
Oh, I don't know. I'll tell you what. We'll let the creator of the artwork decide. Do you want only ripped? Actually, we can let all of Reddit decide. Do you want only ripped and shirtless Bill, or do you want also want ripped and shirtless Edgar? I'll do what the public says. This will definitely go my way.
So some kind of formal Twitter poll, perhaps.
Some kind of Twitter poll, yeah, or just blasts in the subreddit, or Twitter poll is probably the best way to do it. Yeah, it'll be fun for all the people who don't listen to the podcast to be like, the hell is this poll? What is occurring here? In unrelated news, and last thing on the pre-show I want to bring up, which is not in the show notes, but I just remembered it. I learned how to roll my oars, Bill.
You learned how to roll your orders?
I learned how to roll my oars. Yeah, I can now say Roma correctly. I hope that's correct. Anyways, Roma. Which is class. I got really frustrated not being able to roll oars, and I took like 2 or 3 days. It was like, I'm just going to watch Haper tutorials and just like sit there and go over and over again, and it worked. And now I feel really great, but it wasn't worth the effort to learn how to do it. Now I have this neat little party trick that nearly everyone can do. So yeah, excellent.
Phonemic inventory +1.
Phonemic inventory +1. Now to just get the voices trilled down so I can say all those cool Icelandic words that end in a rolled voiceless or, which I can't do that yet. I'd like to do that because they sound like straight out of Skyrim. It's really cool.
And even, like you said a minute ago, I hope I'm doing that correctly. Even if you're not doing it correctly, just say it's a valid allophonic variation in your conlang.
Exactly. The Uvener Trill, an allophonic variation of the rolled or.
Yeah, totally legit.
Yeah, no, 100%. I do still want to get. Another thing I want to be able to get is I want to be able to like sustain it indefinitely, which I can't do. But I've listened to like speakers of languages, native speakers of languages that have the alveolar trill, and they can just like go like for ages, whereas I can't do that, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So that's the thing I want to learn. Anywho, pre-show, that's my pre-show stuff. Shall we do some follow-up?
So in the teaser or the preview for the last episode, when I posted it on Reddit, user Alarbus commented, is the state of Mesa, commented on the map of the state of Mesa, is this not just ersatz Arizona? So I think we can reveal that it's in fact ersatz New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But essentially, you're right. So that was the first thing. And I got, I think, 3 character ideas from people in the Reddit.
Yeah, the Reddit was alight with people suggesting stuff. I think the state of Mesa really took off, which I'm really happy with, Bill.
The first one here I have is Zen 10. There's a frequent commenter suggested a samurai character. And this fits in quite nicely in a historical context because the Meiji Restoration was a civil war that took place in Japan in the late 60s, so contemporary to and slightly after the American Civil War, I think. And that resulted in the shogunate losing its power. So the kind of samurai warrior class not being the ruling class anymore. Now, I think in practice they weren't really samurai in kind of the battle sense anymore. They'd become sort of a political class. But I'm sure there were still martial members. So that there is a good reason why you would have a character like that not in Japan. Mm-hmm. A historical background to hang that upon. Or even, it could be the descendant of a character who left if you wanted to have it slightly later. This account is valid. Another frequent commenter linked a short story called Mr. Haj's Sunset Ride, which I started reading and then I got caught up in the middle of work and I haven't gone back to finish it yet. But the essence of it, from what I could tell, is a character of Arabic heritage in the Wild West. So whose father was from Arabia, and I think another character from Arabia, and the two of them interacting in the Old West as gunslingers, which is exactly what I was looking for.
Is there any, in that case, is there any historical movement or revolution or war or whatever that might have driven someone of Arabic descent to the States, or just literally just like regular old immigration?
I'm not aware of one.
Okay.
I know at the time the whole area was still part of the Ottoman Empire, and there were struggles for independence from the Ottomans, and I think there may have been a couple of short-lived Saudi kingdoms, like literally the House of Saud, but that might have been slightly later. I'm not exactly sure when they were, okay. But I think they had a couple of areas they controlled before the foundation of the current Saudi Arabia. So I'm sure there's something you could put, and even if there wasn't a specific historical event like a war or something, there's always internal conflicts between people. Yeah, they can serve just as well. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, Captain Venoms came up with a good one: a gun-toting rabbi. So this was partially based on or partially similar to a film called The Frisco Kid, which is a film starring Gene Wilder, who is a rabbi traveling from New York to San Francisco in the late 1800s, and who gets caught up in Wild West stuff happening. He gets caught up with a cowboy and bank robbers and things. And I think that could be pretty interesting to have a religiously based character, but from a religion that doesn't get a huge amount of exposure in that genre or in that setting. Mostly you have Christians, for sure, and indigenous American religions. But this character in this is a rabbi who's just finished his training in Poland and is on his way to San Francisco. So it's a culture thing and a different religion thing, and I think that could be pretty interesting. I also, and I said this on the subreddit, I thought it would be cool to have a touch of magic involved. I had initially been thinking a very, very low or no magic setting, but by using magical systems based on the kind of systems of belief that are unfamiliar to the setting, I think that could be quite interesting. So the two that occurred to me initially were Kabbalah, which is sort of a form of mysticism or magic based on Jewish traditions, and Sufism, which is a sort of mystical tradition within Islam. I don't know. I just think they could both be pretty cool to explore in an Old West setting.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's the follow up for the state of Mesa from the last episode.
Speaking of American states, historical American states, or historic America rather, I played Oregon Trail for the first time, like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago. And I knew of Oregon Trail as being like a cultural thing, as like, you know, the original game, like the game that everyone played before games were really a thing.
Yeah.
And I also knew of it as being a notoriously difficult game, an uncompromising game. And I played it, and it was grand. Like, I made it out west first time comfortably. One chap died in my wagon, but that was it. I made it with 3 other people. It was not a problem, and I was kind of like, is this one of those things that like back in the day was quite hard, but like under like with modern gaming techniques, so to speak, it's quite easy. I don't know, but I did enjoy it. And I was kind of like, I wish that they made almost like updated it for like into like a modern AAA game, because like there was, you know, way you can talk to various people along the way and they tell you things.
I do not.
Well, okay, you can. So if you get to various like camps or whatever, you can talk to people. There's usually there's the person that looks like a bartender woman. There's like the guy that looks like he's a Dutch wearing that historical Dutch getup, and then there's a Native American, and they all give you various bits of history about the Oregon Trail. It'd be class to see that like fully acted out and then animated with audio. That'd be really fun to do. But anyhow, just your thing about like the state of Mesa got me thinking about the Oregon Trail, and I was like, oh, I played that, and it was incredibly easy, and it was as such it was a bit of a letdown. I was expecting it to be a total bloodbath.
What I should have thought of this in the last episode, but I forgot to bring it up. There's a game, I don't think it's fully developed yet. It's on early access or something on Steam. Another Western game called This Is My Land. But you play as a Native American, and you are kind of fighting settlers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is absolutely my jam. Like, you know, anti-colonial, 100% what I'm into. And it's a big open world kind of stealth game as well. So I'm looking forward to trying that if I get a chance.
That must be one of the only games that does that. I've never heard of a game where I've never heard of anything really where you play as a Native American.
I'm sure there must be, but nothing immediately springs to mind.
Yeah. Sorry, I realized we're on a bit of a tight schedule today, but just to go with me for a second. You didn't happen to see CGP Grey's latest batch of videos by any chance?
I did not.
Okay, so he has, I'm going to link this in the show notes for people to check out. He has a slight bit of like talking about people here, so just like warnings. He's doing a thing on, essentially I think it all falls under like American Empire, like doing a series of videos on what the American Empire was. And as part of that, he's obviously going to talk about the effect colonialism had on Native Americans. And as a sort of precursor to talking about that, he felt the need to put out a video saying that he is going to refer to Native Americans as Indians throughout the preceding videos. And he outlines the reasons why, and he said he talked to various Native Americans about this, and it's kind of a complicated one and things like that. So apparently, according to him and his research, Native American is actually not. Many Native Americans don't like the term Native American, and in fact prefer the term Indian, and that kind of fried my brain. And listening to him, it seemed like the impression I got is that they prefer the term Indian out of a sort of like almost like they were overcome with attrition, as in like, you guys called us this thing, we've accepted the thing, stop trying to relabel us as other things. And it's this weird dynamic that I never thought about before. I only ever thought about it. Native American sounds correct because, you know, they were the native people to the land that we now call America. But apparently it's
Yeah.
way more complicated, and I think it's an interesting video, so I'm going to link it, and you should go check it out,
Sure.
and I'd love to know what you think about it after having watched it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, that's Mesa. Shall we move on?
Let's.
Okay, so I have 3 items of follow-up coming up here, so everyone brace yourself for Edgar. First item, we have a bit of flag corner to do. And this month, oh god, I nearly said week. This month, the flag corner submission comes from a chap called Jacob via email, and the flag they are submitting is Aroostook County in Maine. So do you want to open it up there, Bill?
Let's do it.
Now, this one is interesting, in the sense that it's one of those flags, I think, that like it's bad, but it's not terrible. It's one of those like stealth crap flags. Do you know what I mean? Links are in the show notes for those who can't watch it, who can't access visuals. Imagine the flag of Nigeria. So 3 vertical stripes, green, white, green. In the white stripe, the middle stripe, there is what is the shape of the county of Aroostook. Very, very, very large in the middle there, taking up almost all of the horizontal width of that green stripe, and below it is the year 1839, which is probably when it was founded, because such is the way that these flags go. And 1839 is not centered. It's not centered on any axis. It's like shoved down into the bottom fifth and over to the left to kind of accommodate the shape of the county, which just looks like not great at all. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's one of those things where like I don't understand people when it comes to making these flags, because like you could make this flag be perfectly okay by removing the year and just shrinking the shape of the county. Like that would work. That isn't ideal in my book, but that would be so much better. Like so many of these bad flags, they're like if you just took one element away and rejiggered slightly, it would be great. So it's but it's also frustratingly shit. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, give Nigeria a gun.
Oh, it does look a bit like a gun. Oh, do you know what I thought?
It looks like a gun, doesn't it? It looks like a little handgun, a little pistol.
And as well as some of the non-linear parts of the sort of shape of the county look like faces. So if you see on the top there, it looks like a bloke's head, and then down at the bottom, it also looks like a bloke's head sticking out to the right there. Which is really weird. It's just so strange. Like, and the font of the 1839 as well is just so ugly.
It looks really uneven. The bars look uneven. Like I'm not sure that it's definitely the case, but the middle one is by far the biggest, the widest.
The middle what?
The
now?
White sector, the white stripe, and the one at the fly. Sorry, the one at the hoist looks thicker than the one at the fly. As well, the green at the hoist looks thicker than the green at the fly.
Oh yeah. See, I was going to say that like the middle white bar is obviously disproportionately big because they wanted to fit in the largest possible county shape in there, but like there's no excuse for having, bar 1, the bar at the hoist, be thinner than the bar at the fly. That's ridiculous, or thicker rather.
It's really weird.
It's not great, but again, it could be not a great flag. It could be a passable flag, but just
perfectly serviceable.
Perfectly serviceable. If people just didn't this incessant need American flag makers, I guess, vexillographers, have this incessant need. They have to put letters and numbers on things. Like, just don't do it. It's fine. It's grand. Anyway, so that was the flag of Aroostook County, Maine. Thank you, Jacob. Jacob also writes, and I'll just call up this email. Now, it's a long email, so I'm not going to read it all out. Apologies, Jake. But essentially, the nuts and bolts of it is they want to talk about their conning and how they feel that language as a reflection of society and culture is really important to them, which I fully agree with. And they bring up the fact that their language has 2 scripts. It has an abugida and a logographic script. And to paraphrase, one is used, I think it's the Abugida is used sort of in the lower classes, middle classes, that kind of thing. And the logographic script is used in the kind of upper classes. And there's a bit of tension. People who use a logographic script look down on those who use the Abugida and etc., which I think is a really cool idea. And this occurs in real life, I believe. At least I remember my father talking about how in Saudi Arabia there was different forms of speech for different peoples and classes. I don't know the exact details, but I remember getting the impression that it wasn't just like Arabic. Like, you don't just speak Arabic. There's like multiple things going on. And I think that's a cool thing to incorporate in conlang. The main point I wanted to bring up, though, was that the Abugida being used by the common folk, he notes that poets and merchants would be included in this common folk group. And this made me think a little bit of ancient Irish history, and I think it's a cool thing that maybe people mightn't be aware of and could incorporate into their world building. In ancient Irish history, the poet was considered like a really important part of society, like right up there with kings. Well, not really the equivalent of a king, but like one rung down from the king. Almost like the way, say, a press secretary in the White House, for example, is part of like the inner circle of staff or whatever. That sort of same thing happened in ancient Ireland. The poet was not a common folk person. The poet was a big member of society and played a very important role in kind of like acting almost like a marketing sort of dude, like writing poems and songs about how great the king is. And I think there's, I could be wrong with this, but I think there was also elements of kind of magic woven into it too, almost like shamanistic sort of thing. So I suppose I bring this up just to say that like absolutely nothing wrong with Jacob's work, but like do consider that something that some people that we might think of as being common folk these days may not always have been so, and don't necessarily have to be so, and it's worth thinking about how you might jigger that up, and that might generate some ideas. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. Well, about the poets things, about the bards, so they were patronized by kings or by rulers, and so they had to promote the king that was their patron, but they had a responsibility to call him out when he did stuff wrong. Yes,
yeah.
So there's kind of there's a complex relationship there, that they have a loyalty to him, but they also have a general loyalty to being honest and to the people in general, and to keeping the king in line, that he has to act honorably and stuff. So they're kind of like a media, if that's they're kind of like a, well, what an ideal media establishment would be like, how journalists ought to behave.
Sure. I think if we think of it as the press secretary analogy I made earlier, it would be like the equivalent of like, what's your one? Sarah Huckabee Sanders being, beholden to Trump, but also like being more than professionally capable of coming out and speaking out against him, which is a bizarre dynamic if you think about that. Like, that's not a thing that we see in the modern world. That's a really cool sort of thing. And I guess, and it's also worth pointing out that, again, just to emphasize, like, people may think that when they hear that bards were being patronized by kings, you might get a sort of maybe almost a classical music sort of sense there, where you have musicians who are patronized by the aristocracy. And that, at least in the early days, those musicians were still considered very much servants of the aristocracy, but the bards were not. Like, they weren't just like lowly people who were paid by the king. Like, they were like high society. So almost like the likes of, say, like Beethoven was like, people call him like the rock star musician, where he kind of like was like, I'm no longer a servant, I am an artiste sort of thing. I am raising myself up here. So these bards would have been the equivalent of like Beethoven as opposed to, say, Bach.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a cool little thing that Jacob's email made me think of, and that might be of use to some of you in your world building.
For sure.
So last thing I want to bring up is we got another email from a chap called Chaz, who, as as a follow-up to the Denis numbering system we mentioned last time, he mentions another numbering system from Heaven's Vault, which I don't know what that is. But I'm going to link this numbering system from Heaven's Vault. Apparently, this game everyone should play if you're interested in conlang, because the whole shtick of the game, according to Chaz, is that you have to like decipher the conlang to like beat the game. Like almost like you're a historical linguist or whatever, which sounds hella cool. But anyway, I'll link the glyphs in the show notes. It's a base 10 system. It's got a sub base of 5. The glyphs, as much I think is cool that, you know, conlang is being represented in games in a very central manner, I don't like the glyphs again. Like it's this case of they just look over complicated in a way, and I feel like people would over time reduce these down to more simple elements. They don't look very distinguishable from a distance, which I think is not great in the script. But then every time I think this, every time I say this, I always think back to Chinese glyphs which look horrifically complicated, but they obviously work. So, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen other. What do you think of these, Bill?
They do look complicated to me, some of them. But I mean, there could be a lot of reasons that they would remain complicated depending on their use and stuff. And the more I look at them, like, they're actually not all that bad.
No, they make a nice set. I should point out here, sorry, for everyone and Bill, that it's only the second row that are the numbers.
Okay, sorry, right, yes, I see now.
And if you hover over them, you'll see what numbers they represent. See, my massive issue here is if you take the glyph for 4 and the glyph for 9, they are identical. Like, at a distance, they are utterly identical. The only distinguishing feature is a tiny, tiny horizontal line that can so easily be obscured by like stroke thickness. That I think if you were to actually give this to people and write with it, they would quickly find some sort of alternative way of writing it. Is my opinion.
Yeah, but I mean, when we write English in the Roman script, capital I and lowercase l and the numeral 1 can all be represented with just a straight line. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I'm not saying you should ever create a system devoid of things like that, but like this entire thing, like again, the number 6 can easily be obscured with the number 1, the number 7 with the number 2, the number 8 with the number 3.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like almost like ambiguity is a feature of the system as opposed to just like an oddity. And I think that's not ideal.
Mm.
And again, and even in the Roman, like our alphabet, there's still problems in that as well with, like, say, dyslexics and things like that. Like B and D are hugely problematic for people. So it's not like we have the perfect system either. Like I think if you actually think about a functional thing, you really want to minimize the sort of ambiguity. And again, I say this fully being aware of Chinese as being a thing, or Chinese the logographic system as being a thing, and also being aware of like my aesthetics as a thing, because a lot of things I propose on Artifexian are nightmares for people who have dyslexia, and you know that's my bad there. So it's very hard to come up with something that's like completely clear. But this, I think, is too far on the other end where it's completely unclear.
I think I'd probably need to see it more in context than this here.
Perhaps.
But I take your point.
And so, with that point, that is my final point of follow-up. Shall we move into green room? Oh, not green room, sorry. Shall we move into the writer's room?
We're totally upending the form today. Yes, to the writer's room. I've written something again. So back to the well, I was going to say back to the pen, but you also draw things with pen, so that's not really a good comparison to map making. Back to the typewriter, let's say. Back to the keyboard.
Sure.
So I'm just going to launch straight into it.
Cool. Go for it.
Days of fruitless labour. Days I cannot count, measuring at least a handful. Days of fruitless labour without sleep. My pen scratching without cease. I know not when I last slept. The closing of my eyes brought only restless, relentless sensation. Dancing lights in place of rightful dark, frantic energy in place of rightful calm. And so I would contort and thrash in my cot, the release of sleep evading me, ever beyond my grasp, until I rose once more to take up pen again and coax from it that which, my mind can conceive of it in its entirety, but my faculty of letters has failed. This until last night, in desperation, I broke my own custom. I sent for a flask of spiced brandy and warmed it upon the brazier. To the coals I added a fistful of musk leaves. The sweet scented smoke and the warmth of the brandy together weighed down my limbs, covered my eyes, and softened my thoughts, and slow to sleep at last I withdrew. But while my body rested, my mind did not. I felt myself lifted from my cot, taken by some external force from my chamber, from these towers, from this very city. I took in all at once the entire sky, more vivid than through my lenses, sharper by far than any impression of mortal sight, and encompassing the breadth of Icairn and the whole span of the night in a single glance. All that followed, I saw in a moment as brief as the space between drops of rain, that fleeting moment yet stretched to infinity within its span. I withdrew from this planet, and the forests and peaks of Icairn and its oceans and plains and deserts lay all at once beneath my gaze. I beheld the burning face of the sun and the spirits that dance in her valleys and rivers, the scorched wastes of Vasath, the scarred shell of the cradle, the desolate and haunted expanses of Nishta. I beheld all these, and diverse and nameless rocks and moons, some unknown to mortal science. My mind was drawn by that terrible, irresistible force across Vasath. Here I saw figures, like humanity but not of humanity, plotting great evil in their mountain fastnesses. A sickly queen stood in a jewelled oasis, and her people know not the suffering that is to come. A mountain built neither by nature nor humanity stretched to the sky and teemed with life. I was drawn next to the cradle. I saw a vast continent, plains and mountains and jungles, all dominated by a great central plateau. Here a wicked king in the east warred upon the peoples of the continent. Legions of war beasts ponderously marched to battle, as his men flattened the land in broad avenues snaking from horizon to horizon, having not the art of flight. Mysterious figures of great power, that yet seemed familiar, stalked the central plateau, and to the south a wise, benevolent king ruled a broad, peaceful land, though behind him stood a cabal of shadowy figures. In his audience chamber I watched as the king presided over a great celebration, when one of the dark figures attending his side looked directly upon me. I was filled with a sudden awareness that just as I could see, I too could be seen, and I was filled with a dread of these alien folk. The man of shadow fixed his gaze in my direction, and I began to feel myself pulled two ways, a strange gravity summoning me to this dread wizard, conflicted with the irresistible force drawing me through the cosmos. In that moment, terror surpassed my senses. My next conscious thought found me in my cot, soaked with the sweat of my day's labours and my night's soporific travels. I took directly to my desk to pen this account, lest it fade from my memory. What mysteries and horrors inhabit these sister worlds of ours? What powers unknown might the humanity of other planets wield? It is not for us to know. Alega Kareth, citizen of Mirsphere.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That was trippy as all hell.
Cool. Good.
All right. As per usual, give us some background here. Like, my overarching thing here is why a fever dream?
I was trying to think of how I like to. My usual method is to tell something about the world, kind of indirectly. So through the people themselves, within the setting, the way they describe something reveals more than just what they're describing. It reveals like the whole context that they view it in, right?
Yes.
My main kind of idea here, is in Icairn, and in the Abesque culture, the Spires culture, they don't really have a concept of roads.
Sure, because they're people of the sky.
Yeah, because flight is very, very easy to them. Like, they have roads within cities and like small distances, like say like from a farm to a village, perhaps. But the idea of like roads to get across a landscape is just not a thing they have, and that's in that kind of paragraph about the cradle, the flattening the land in broad avenues, snaking from horizon to horizon.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a road, but she finds it really weird to see
Yep.
in this fever dream she has. So
There's,
that was the genesis thing of that. There was like kind of someone imagining roads and finding it kind of strange and alien. And it grew around that and from that and in both directions.
I will say a lot of people over the years have always been like, hey, you talk a lot about this space stuff, but like I do fantasy world building, or I'm writing a fantasy novel, and none of this is in any way applicable to me. And I think what you've done here is a great example of how one can deal with cosmological elements in a sort of like low-techy quasi-fantasy setting. Like the fever dream is a really good mechanism of doing that, and a what's the word you used? Didactic? What's it called?
Diegetic.
And it's diegetic. Similarly, stuff like mystics and like shamans can relay an awful lot of cosmology in a sort of low fantasy setting. So that was the thing I just wanted to bring up on this. I think it's a wonderful way of bringing in, more science almost in a way.
Yeah, bringing space into fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Your first paragraph here, if I may, can I launch into my questions?
Go for it.
So the whole first paragraph here, listeners, if you recall, it's the bit where Bill sets up the sort of this person is restless. My only comment here is that welcome to my life. Your line about my mind can conceive of it in its entirety, but my faculty of letters has failed. That hit home so hard. Like I'll lie in bed, I'll be lying in bed, trashing around, like my mind racing, thinking about all these things, and I'm like, oh, I need to get up and write this down. And then if I ever do that, I can never ever seem to write it down correctly. So that entire first paragraph hit out home to me, and I've also not been sleeping well of late. So that whole first paragraph was very close to home, Bill. Thank you.
I really hate when people give unsolicited advice for stuff. But just as kind of a question, have you tried drinking a flask of spiced brandy and smoking some Ngusk leaves?
Well, we'll talk about the Ngusk leaves in a second. But like, part of me was kind of like, I'm not going to do this because I realize it's a slippery slope. But part of me is like, I wonder, can I take sleeping pills to like help with the sleeping? But then it's like, you don't want to become reliant on them. So it is a tricky one, and I totally sympathize with this person who feels the need to resort to alcohol and Ngusk leaves, because you're kind of like, not sleeping is rough. Like, it is rough. But anyhow, on the Ngusk leaves, talking about them, I got the impression that these might be like fantasy marijuana. Is that the case?
Not exactly. I mean, they do have a drug effect. They're used in magic. And when they're taken in small doses, they just kind of make you sleepy. They have a kind of a calming, soporific effect. When taken in larger doses, they grant visions. So the dose taken here was not sufficient to induce visions, or it was not intended to be sufficient to induce visions. It was just like a small amount to help sleep.
Oh, so that it sounds like ayahuasca. Is ayahuasca a leaf though?
I think it's usually drunk as a tea, but I don't know what the actual thing that you harvest to make that is. If it's a root or a leaf or a fungus or what, I don't know.
But these nutsleaves are definitely analogous to a real world drug, like maybe psilocybin, because if you take only a small bit of psilocybin, it doesn't really do a whole shebang. But if you take what is it called, the hero's dose or whatever, then it does then you have liftoff apparently. So I don't know. Would that be kind of analogous?
I mean, I don't have a specific thing in mind, but definitely to the general phenomenon of the use of entheogens or psychedelics or whatever in magic or in experiences. Yeah.
Are these Nuss leaves legal?
Yeah. There's no real concept of prohibition of a thing like that.
Oh.
In this culture.
Have you got any historical information on prohibition here? It just occurs to me. When did we start banning things? Because surely there was a point in human history where we all just like drank and ate whatever the hell, and then at some point someone came along and was like, "We can't do that anymore."
It's a pretty modern concept.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. See, I've no notion of this whatsoever.
I mean, like, I think there was like not a great availability of, say, opium in the 1700s or in the 1600s anyway. But there wouldn't have been, as far as I understand, in like most of Western Europe, a law banning it. It wouldn't have been kind of a concept required legislation.
Yeah, I suppose an opium was legal in the States for ages as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I find really nuts is that heroin apparently was legal in the States. You could just get it in the pharmacy, which is just like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah, until the 50s, I think.
What? Until the 50s, you could buy heroin in the pharmacy?
I think so. I mean, you could get prescriptions for it. You couldn't just necessarily buy it over the counter. You probably could at an earlier time. But, I mean, if you want to read about this topic, Junkie by William Burroughs is an incredible book. And that deals with the change in the culture surrounding heroin in the 50s. Very, very, very interesting novel.
Hold on. William Burroughs, is he... No, who's that journalist / writer who just had all of the drug problems? Who was a mad joke altogether? Is that William S. Burroughs?
Hunter S. Thompson?
Hunter S. Thompson. Sorry, I was thinking of Hunter S. Thompson. My bad.
That's okay.
Anyhow, yeah, so that was Nusk Leaves. What else have I got here? I going further down in your piece, I adore your description of the sun, in which you say, "I beheld the burning face of the sun and the spirits that dance in her valleys and rivers." That is class. And given what you just said about like how a person might describe this, that's really cool. Like, that is really, really cool. And it's a strong use of imagery. So well played, sir.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, Nishada. Nishada?
Yes. Nishada.
Yeah, explain. I don't think I've heard that before. What is it? What can you tell me?
So, Nishada is the next planet in the system after Ikaern.
Oh.
Yes.
And did you outline... Way back in the day, did you outline what sort of genre would be going on that planet?
Yep.
Oh, can you remind me? Because I'm definitely not going to look it up on the fly, man.
Just to kind of give a quick overview, I tried to build a system to be as densely populated as I could kind of get away with. And Romance is the 5th planet.
Ikaern.
So there's Ikaern is the 5th planet out. There's a small one, kind of a Mercury-like planet very close to the sun. Then there's a sort of an iron planet is the next one. Then we have Vasath. Then we have the main planet, Handwavia, which we have also learned at least a Abeski name for today. And then we have this one you're asking about, Neshta. And then we have Neshta. And Neshta has much higher, not much higher, but it has higher gravity than any of the others. So whereas the main planet has normal kind of Earth equivalent gravity, and Ikaern has 60% of that, Neshta has 1.3 times, so it's 30% heavier than Earth. So over twice as heavy than Ikaern. Over twice as heavy as Ikaern.
And you were saying at the start though that explicitly you wanted different genres to play out in these
Oh,
different
sorry.
worlds.
Yeah, I didn't answer your question at all. Yeah. So this, I thought that idea of like a kind of an oppressive gravity was pretty interesting. And it's a kind of an existential horror kind of place. So the things that live there are outright hostile to other forms of life, and sort of Lovecraftian in a sense.
Okay.
Sort of kind of approaching Lovecraftian horror.
Okay, cool. You mentioned briefly there that we have a term for hand wavy. I mentioned. What is that?
Yeah, the cradle.
That's the cradle. All right. So, when you're referring to the cradle, you're referring to hand wavy. Okay. And so then, do I take it because these are named worlds from this person's perspective? Do I take it then that this culture, the Spire's culture, only has knowledge, or only has a lot of knowledge about these like three worlds: their own world, the cradle, and Neshta,
And Vasath.
and Fasad? Sorry, yeah, those
Yeah.
bundles. Like, do they only have knowledge of those, and then everything else is just unnamed rocks beyond that?
No, they would have names for all of the planets that they can observe, and I suspect they'd be able to observe like most of them.
Okay.
Certainly, the next one out is a super Jupiter, and then the one after that is kind of a Saturn kind of one. So I'd imagine they'd be able to observe both of those, and as I wrote here, Alega has knowledge of astronomy. She says something about the lenses more vivid than through my lenses. So she is used to observing the sky and observing the cosmos. But the reason that these ones are named is because those are the inhabited planets, or the more relevantly to the history of the setting, the inhabited planets, and also her journey got interrupted.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Cool. Going on to the Fasath bit that you mentioned, do you want to talk to me about this sickly queen in a jeweled oasis and this mountain built neither by nature or humanity, or is that has to be left open to our investigation?
I haven't outlined the thing about the mountain yet, although you correctly identified it from something that I'd written before. Off air, you said, "Oh wait, is this thing this thing?" And I said, "Yeah, that's exactly what it is."
Okay, I don't. Okay, will you tell me again off air? We'll let the people in the subreddit try and figure it out.
Sure,
because I don't remember it at all. What about the sickly queen and in her jeweled oasis?
So there was one of the cities in. Remember, I made the map of Vasath.
The polar map.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a city in it called Ilki.
Yes, I do. I remember that. That was so long ago.
I can't remember exactly how I pronounced it. I'll tell you now, because I have it open on my Tumblr right now. It was March 2018, so nearly 2 years.
Whoa. That's intense.
Oh wait, no, actually, it was a little before that. It was a little before that, because the March 2018 was the origin myth. So yeah, there's the city Ilki, and that's the jeweled oasis.
Oh, okay, cool. And like, are we to read this as being like an accurate description of what's going on, or are we to read this as like a fever dream? Like, as in, is there a sickly queen sitting in Ilki? Or is this just the writer's bizarre visions?
So the people of Ikaern don't have specific knowledge about other planets. They understand broadly that the other planets are inhabited, and that they are broadly inhabited by humans. Like that they are, broadly speaking, inhabited by people like themselves to whatever degree. So they wouldn't be able to name anything about those places. They wouldn't be able to say, "Oh, well, the city of Ilki is on Vasath." So what Alega sees is a truth for sure, or it is certainly the things she is seeing in this experience are certainly referring to real things.
So then,
how reliable it is not clear.
Sure, but then the next question that it makes me want to ask is, how is she doing this? I'm thinking then that the musk leaves or the consumption of alcohol, or whatever, has some sort of like magical connection to these worlds. Because otherwise, the only other way of reading it then is that she had a wild dream that coincidentally happened to be accurate to a degree. Do you know?
Yeah.
So am I correct in thinking then that like what she has taken, or her sickness perhaps, is linking her magically to these other worlds?
It wouldn't have to be that the leaves themselves have that effect or have that power or ability, but they could induce a state in the person who takes them to be receptive to other influences.
Oh, that's a snaky way of putting it, Bill. I thought you were going to say that if it would put the mind into a state that almost like what's called EMT. Is it EMT?
DMT, the drug.
No, that psychics do it the whole time. What's it called? Where you kind of connect with other people's minds. What is the thing?
ESP?
ESP, yeah. So my what I thought you were going to say is that the leaves put the mind in a state that it can be opened up to this like this background ESP that exists in this world, that like all the peoples of these planets are linked, but they ordinarily don't know it unless their mind can be induced into the correct state. Which is obviously not what you're going for, but that was cool.
Well, no, I mean that's a potential interpretation that the state exists, and one way of accessing it may be through the consumption of Ngusk leaves.
And next thing, you don't need to answer this at all, but the next thing I wonder is, we do know that people travel between planets in this setting, right?
Yeah.
I wonder, and again, actually don't answer this at all, because otherwise it'll spoil the fun. I wonder whether there's any connection between what's going on cognitively here and actual physical movement. I'm getting like flashes of Star Trek Discovery, where, you know, like the whole mycelial network thing.
Right.
It's like you're riding along the almost like the neurons of the brain that is the universe. I wonder if a similar thing is going on. That would be cool. That's like, actually, that's in general, like, that's a cool idea. You could take that, listeners. You can have it for free. It's all yours. But that's class. That's really cool. You're writing, not my idea. Sorry. And the last thing I've written here is, well, actually, I didn't really make any notes about the cradle, but do you want to talk a little bit about the cradle at all? Is there anything in there we should know about?
Yeah, you know about all of this.
We know about all of it. Grand. Okay. And
yeah, everything in the cradle you have come across before.
Okay, cool. I did clock the Wicked King, and I was kind of like, that sounds a bit like Handwavia. And then, so yeah, obviously it is.
Precisely.
Last thing I've noted then is, I just want to give you props again for the line, I was filled with a sudden awareness that just as I could see, I too could be seen. And I was filled with the dread of these alien folk. That's like very Lovecraftian. Like that's...
Oh, I used I was filled twice in the same sentence. Damn, I'm going to have to edit that.
But either way, that's really Lovecraftian. And it's really evocative of kind of like I genuinely, when you read that to me, was, you know, picturing myself as this person, and then like suddenly becoming aware of like this ominous, dark, horrific figure like looking through me, and it's very, very evocative. I think it's quality writing, sir.
Thank you.
And that is all I have to say. As per usual, any final thoughts or anything that I missed that you think is particularly interesting?
Did the roads thing, was that apparent before I explained it?
Yeah. Yeah, I initially took it as sort of, if you imagine an army on the move, they can look like they are broad avenues snaking through the landscape, you know, almost like a train of
Yeah.
ants. So I thought at
Mhm.
first it was like just a poetic description of massive armies on the move. But then, you know, obviously after like literally 2 seconds of thinking about it, I was like, oh no, it's roads. So I think that's
Cool.
clear.
Yeah. Yeah, all of the hand wavia stuff has the stuff that I covered in Lamo
Mhm.
like 2 years ago when I was writing about Enlamo. Sorry, no, Lamo was the name of the country. This isn't included in the thing, but you know the way one of the roles within a Besky vessel is the weird.
Yes.
Yes, a Lega used to be a weird.
Oh, geez, everyone's weird in this world.
She's a retired weird,
Okay, all right, cool.
or like not like retired, but just like no longer serving, like has finished her commission or whatever.
Okay, and she's a new character, isn't she?
Yes, she hasn't been encountered before,
Cool.
as far as I know.
Yeah, no, she struck me as being new. Cool, man. Props. I think that's. I say this every time, but like, I really enjoyed that one. I think it was certainly one of your best, like narratively.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, like sometimes I think your work is really good in terms of just like the world building of it. But this had a very kind of nice flow to it, and it told a really cool, trippy story with a nice, like, you know, horrifying ending to it. And yeah, it was great, really good. All right, so on that, will we do a bit of Edgar building?
Let's do a bit of Edgar building.
All right, have you watched my latest
How to build
video?
your own Edgar.
Build your own Edgar.
Build an Edgar workshop.
Have you watched my latest video?
I have.
Excellent. Okay, so for those who haven't watched this video, it's going to be linked to the show notes. It is Inventing a Number System Part 2, featuring Mitch from the Conlan Critic, in which we follow up from the last time where we built a sort of very simple number system. And in this video, we follow up with like how you could go about thinking about the more trippy things you can do with numbers. Before I launch into the things I want to address, do you have any things that you need cleared up or questions or anything like that? Oh, I hear a piece of paper turning.
I've already lost my understanding of how nullery works. I kind of understood it at a certain point in the video when it was being explained, and now I can't remember anymore because it was really weird.
We'll talk. I'll definitely talk about nullery because there is confusion about what nullery is. Outside of nullery, have you got anything?
I have comments about the various things, but nothing I think need clearing up. We can go through it chronologically.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
For the thing about the non-positional or the mixed radix notations.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought when that was brought up, I was like, oh, well, I could think of a really clear, obvious example of that already. It's time. And then at the exact moment, the video said, like in a digital clock. So I don't know if that makes me feel foolish or makes me feel smart. I'm not sure.
I mean, I think if anything, it makes Mitch feel smart that he had his finger on the pulse there when he wrote that bit. So that's good.
For sure. And the same thing happened when you were talking about using different bases for different kinds of counting. I was like, oh, you know, if you have a language that has multiple, or, you know, a variety of noun classes, then you could use, and then he explained the exact same thing.
Excellent. That actually makes me so happy, Bill. That's great.
Yeah. How do you feel about long versus short scale, Edgar?
How do I feel?
Yeah.
Man, to be honest with you, I think it's all kind of arbitrary and just whatever. Like, just pick a convention and we're good to go. I suppose if I were to like nail my colors to a mast, I think I might say neither, and I'd rather just a system that has the same factor of increase starting from 1.
Right.
Do you know? So like, as in,
Yeah.
1 gets a word, 10 gets a word, 100 gets a word, 1,000 gets a word, all the way up, instead of just starting this sequence at 1,000,000. But other than that, I've no strong feelings. I find it confusing because, like, you know, I speak a bit of German and obviously I speak English, and sometimes I have to do the mental arithmetic of like, wait, what is a billion? And that's really annoying to have to do. But outside of that, I have no strong feelings. Do you have any strong feelings about this?
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
Like, I don't know, the long scale just seems wrong to me because I'm an English speaker as my first language. But it is a little bit more kind of consistent in a way than the short scale. Because
So why is it more consistent?
So 1,000,000, right,
Mhm.
is 10 to the 6.
Yes.
And then 1,000,000,000 in that is 10 to the 12. So it's twice of what 1,000,000,000 is. Or you're doubling the power, if you get me. So it's 10 to the 12 rather than 10 to the 6.
This is in the long scale.
In the long scale, yeah. And then 1,000,000,000,000 in that is to another. It's not doubling, but it's tripling the power for 1,000,000. So it's 10 to the 18.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So that is just a little bit more consistent. That you can slot 2 and 3 and 4 corresponding to the prefixes of bi and tri and quad more sensibly into that system. Whereas in the short scale, 10 to the 3 is 1,000, right? 10 to the 6 is 1,000,000, and 10 to the 9 is 1,000,000,000. So the formula for that is you take the prefix, right? And say the number implied by the prefix is x, and it's 10 to 3x plus 3, which is a lot more convoluted in terms of like the correspondence between the words and the number.
So your favoring of the short scale is just purely that you speak English and you're willing to forego any sort of mathematical beauty for that.
Well, it's the linguistic mathematical interface is where the beauty ought to occur. But yeah, no, it just, I don't know. It's always annoyed me that it doesn't match up correctly.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly valid. I think at the end of the day, though, it is one of those things where the speaker is never aware of the underlying maths until they look into it. So it is really an arbitrary choice of just pick a convention and go with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool.
The next two things, so the bijective system, which is the one you described where 10 gets a unique symbol, and then you begin using double digits, say if we're using a kind of positional thing, from 11 onwards, or whatever, the base plus 1.
Sure.
Right? And that's cool, that totally makes sense. But Conlang Critic said that there's a problem in that you don't have a 0. Well, like you could just have a symbol for a 0 that isn't used in another context, and it isn't required for the use of bases.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. I wonder. I don't know if such a system exists or if it has a name, but I wonder. It makes me think that maybe could you perhaps have a society that uses bijectivity, so has no concept of 0 per se, and then they sort of begin to get a concept of 0 and tack it into their bijective system, like what you're saying, and then after a while go, wait a minute, now that we have this 0, we can just do what we currently do, as in we, like us, currently do. I wonder if it's tacking a 0 onto a bijective system could be an intermediary step.
That makes it seem like it's the way that's phrased makes it seem like the system like that we use as Western European English speakers, etc., in the modern world, is like some kind of goal that things naturally progress towards. I don't think there's any need that it would have to go that way. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't just have a bijective system that has a specific symbol for 0, because I don't think it's any better, and there's any reason for our system to supplant a bijective system.
No, but I would phrase it less as it's a goal, and rather like a language can evolve through our system, like our system not being the end point but being a point on a line. And I wonder if perhaps bijectivity can very naturally lead into bijectivity plus 0, and that can very naturally lead into R1 without claiming that R1 is like the ultimate end game of numbering systems. And because it makes sense to you, man. Like if a culture were to adopt the concept of 0, the leap to then kind of say, well, hang on, 1x is the same as 1, 0. That seems like that's it's almost naturally falls out of that thought process of obtaining a 0. I don't know.
Really?
I don't know. But it's an interesting one.
Hmm.
What else you got for me?
Are there examples of using mixed radix on either side of I wrote down decimal point. Obviously, it wouldn't necessarily be a decimal point, but, of a dividing point between integers and not integers, less than integers.
Yeah, so like the radix point, it's called, I think.
The radix point, okay.
Yeah, if you go to the Wikipedia page for mixed radix, you'll see that the example they set up is using time, but it's using time with minutes being just left of the radix point. So seconds and nanoseconds, etc., are after the radix points. So you can just, the impression I get, I could be entirely wrong, the impression I get is you can basically decide where in such a system said radix point goes, and then you can just build around that, if that makes any sense at all.
But in what you're describing, what's the radix on either side? Like, so I'm assuming if you're counting like the nanoseconds or whatever, that's going to be done in decimally. But so what's on the second side?
Right, because
if you're just counting
but you're taking
blank seconds, then
right, but you're taking everything with respect to seconds. Yeah? Or sorry, in the Wikipedia example, you're taking everything with respect to minutes. I believe that's what it does.
Oh.
Okay. So whatever occurs just left of the radix point is kind of what the whole system is referencing. So whatever is just right of the reference point is with respect to whatever's just left of the radix point. Does that make sense?
I'm not following your explanation, but I think I can kind of see what you mean.
Okay, well, this actually leads on to... That was your final point, wasn't it?
No.
Oh, okay.
You go ahead, and then I just... One more thing.
Okay, right. Well, this kind of leads into the first point I was going to talk about, which would be my lack of understanding of mixed radix systems, and I want to apologize publicly to Mitch about this. So just a bit of behind the scenes, and this is one of the reasons why I can't explain it very well. Behind the scenes here for the script is Mitch had written the bit about mixed radixes. Or radices? Mixed radices? Whatever it is. And he had an explanation in there for how it works and why it works, like the theory, the proof behind what's going on. And I cut that because I kind of like very ignorantly was like, well, I know what mixed radix is. This is where every position in a number system is just a different base. So it'd be like, imagine like, say, the first slot of a positional system is like 10 to the 0. And the next slot is like 4 to the 1. And the next slot is like 6 to the 2, whatever you want. Just stick a different base in there. And I was operating under that assumption the entire time until literally the 11th hour. And Mitch emailed me, was like, yeah, it's good video, man, but you're entirely confused about the way mixed radixes work. And I kind of last minute read up and I was like, oh crap, I don't understand mixed radices at all. And there was a big scramble and I had to get Mitch to re-record things. And I just want to say publicly, I apologize to Mitch for just like not listening to or not reading correctly what he had wrote and just assuming that my thoughts were correct. So as such, I know I'm not great with mixed radices, and that's likely, Bill, why I can't properly explain it to you. If Mitch is listening, I don't know if he listens to the show or not. If he is, drop it in the subreddit, Mitch. Answer Bill's question in the subreddit, and that's probably the best way of sorting out Bill here. Don't come through me on this topic. I'm no good with it.
I think what I'm asking is just like a pretty specific version of a mixed radix, that you count one thing on one side of a radix point, and like just for general counting, not for a specific purpose like counting time or counting currency or something, just kind of numbers in general, that you count, say, in base 10 on one side and in base 5 on the other side of the radix point, something like that.
So that then sounds a lot like what I thought mixed radices were at start, where it's just like in one place you have one base and another place you have another base.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm saying very specifically that are on either side of a radix point, not like columns of a positional number system in general.
Okay, I'm gonna have to defer this one to Mitch.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I have one last
I
thing.
mean, if anything, it's simpler. So
Yeah, for sure.
what I'm saying.
If anything, sorry, not if anything. You said you have one last thing to go, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
There was so you covered a lot of different ideas,
Yes, a lot.
and some of them had real world examples, and some of them did not.
Mhm.
So, is it safe to assume that there aren't actual languages that use negative bases or non-integral bases?
I think that is very safe to assume. I think one should view this video as equal parts conlang help and number nerdery.
Cool.
And also, like, I realize that, like, yeah, negative bases aren't very human applicable, but there are people who create like art langs and philosophical langs and things like that.
For
and
sure.
the more esoteric bases might be a thing for those people to explore. So don't immediately write off the likes of, I don't know, base 1/phi or something crazy like that. You might be able to do a cool art piece with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I go on to the main thing I need to talk about before we wrap this up?
I suppose I'll allow you. Of course, man.
Okay, so by far, I'll be reiterating all of I'm about to say on a Q&A because it's important. By far, the most feedback I got in this video was the assertion that what we said in the video, that 0 to the power 0 is undefined, is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, that entire bit about nullery is null and void because Mitch and I were unaware that 0 to the power 0 is in fact equal to 1.
Yeah.
And it is, in fact, not equal to 1. We are
Okay, so
not...
this is a specific example of x to the 0 is equal to 1 usually, but not when it's 0 to 0.
X to the 0. Yes, exactly. That is exactly it. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to...
Because I did wonder about that.
Yeah. Now, to be fair to Mitch here, Mitch had an explanation written in that section, and I again took my editorial tendencies a bit too far, maybe, and cut it and was like, I'm going to just go for the joke, right? Because jokes are not that fun, I think, if you explain it, and I think it was much more effective going, it's undefined, and then Mitch goes, it's like 0 to 0. Oh, sorry. Alarms, I'm sorry. It's like 0 divided by 0. Explosion. I think I wanted to get quickly into the explosion and not get bogged down in explaining why 0 to the 0 is undefined. So just for the sake of clarity, if it's okay with you, Bill, can I go through the reason why 0 to the 0 is undefined and it is not equal to 1?
Sure. I would actually enjoy that.
Cool, excellent. Okay, so to explain, first of all, we all agree that 0 divided by 0 is undefined, correct?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone in the world argues with that point whatsoever. Now, the reason why it's undefined is because if we were to graph, and in fact you should do this...
specifically 0 divided by 0 is undefined.
Or, anything divided by 0 is undefined.
Okay, yeah.
So go to Wolfram Alpha for me, Bill, and type in the search bar graph 1 divided by x.
Okay.
And everyone at home can follow along too here. And so when that graph pops up, the reason why in this case 1 divided by x is undefined, because as we come in from positive x values and negative x values, the graph diverges in two different ways. So 1 divided by x coming in from positive x values, honing in on 0, tends towards positive infinity. And 1 divided by x coming in from negative x values towards 0 tends towards negative infinity. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So therefore, 1 divided by x is undefined because the answer spits out two different, like doing the limit spits out two different answers. It's either positive infinity or negative infinity. And maths...
You mean 0 divided by x?
1 divided by x. Anything divided by x. As we go towards 0, if we were to actually hit 0, we'd get two answers. Positive infinity and negative infinity. Yeah?
As we go towards 0, we get... Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As we go towards 0, and then when we hit 0, we'd have two answers. Positive infinity, negative infinity, as per that graph. Yeah?
So I'm getting confused with the language here, but I'm following what you're saying about the graph. Yeah.
Yeah. So that means it's undefined, because in maths, we don't allow something to have multiple answers. Like 1 plus 1 is 2. Always. It's not like 2 sometimes and 3 some other times. Like there has to be a answer, otherwise it's undefined. Correct?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Now, if we do the same thing, right, where we graph the function x to the x, right, and you could do this on Wolfram Alpha, Bill, you should do it. People at home should do it. We find that as we come in from the positive x values, if we take the limit of x to the x as x goes to 0, coming in from the positive side towards 0, the graph converges to 1, right? We should see the graph intersect 1, right, on the y-axis. If we come in from the negative values, all right, so we tend towards 0 with increasingly smaller negative x values, the graph also converges on 1, right?
Sorry, I'm getting real caught up in the language here.
Okay, but do you see that the graph crosses the y-axis at 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if we came from the positive direction or negative direction, it crosses 1. It is unlike the 0, it's unlike the 1 divided by x graph. It doesn't go off in different directions, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the claim why most people say that 0 to the 0 is equal to 1. Because no matter how we take a limit from whatever direction, the graph will always cross 1. Ergo, 0 to the 0 is equal to 1, right? And that holds, and that is correct, if and only if we only are discussing real numbers, right? The moment we move away from real numbers, like if we move into the complex plane, the same thing that happened with 1 divided by x, where the graph splits and goes off into all sorts of weird things, also occurs. So in a general, broad context, 0 to the power of 0 is undefined because it does not hold for all numbers. It holds for real numbers, but it does not hold for all numbers. And as such, mathematicians say 0 to the 0 is undefined. You with me?
I think so.
Well, that is the proof of the thing. I'll link 2 videos. Actually, no, I'll link 1 video from Numberphile that goes through it.
Yeah, please do. I trust you, and I kind of get it, but I'd like to properly internalize it.
Sure. And as a specific retort to people, a lot of people were like 0 to 0 is equal to 1 because, like you said, Bill, anything to the power of 0 is equal to 1. I think people in that instance are also forgetting that 0 to the power of anything is 0. And why you would just pick one rule over the other is kind of a bit weird to me. Exactly, yeah. You can't just say, oh, well, this is the case, and I'm going to ignore all evidence to the contrary. You have to be able to like rigorously prove why a thing is equal to 1. So 0 to the 0 in summation is undefined if and only if you limit your calculations to the real numbers. 0 to the power of 0 is undefined if you limit if your calculations encompass all numbers. If it's limited to real numbers, it can be equal to 1. And the thing that is really confusing about all this crack is that if you go to any calculator and you input 0 to the 0, it will spit back 1 at you, right?
Right.
But people don't kind of question that and don't kind of say like what are the implicit assumptions that the calculator is making. So when the calculator spits back 1 for 0 to the 0, it is implicitly saying that is with respect to real numbers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would spit back undefined. And it's a similar thing with, like, say, if you put in the square root of -1 into the calculator, that throws back an error. That's not like saying that imaginary numbers don't exist. That's saying with respect to real numbers, the square root of -1 is an error. But in complex
it's saying
numbers,
I am a calculator, all I can do is deal with real numbers.
Bingo, exactly. And again, I think this is where some of the confusion lies. People will go to their calculator and say 0 to the power of 0, and it gets spat out as 1 and go, oh, that must be it always. But it's so much more nuanced just because it's this like weird edge case things where like different like worlds collide, like 0 to the x and x to the 0. When these worlds collide, strangeness happens. So again, just once again, 0 to the 0 is in fact undefined. There is going to be a video in the description for you to check it out. It is not you cannot say it is just equal to 1 and leave it at that. A lot more caveats need to be put on that statement.
I asked Wolfram Alpha, and Wolfram Alpha said it was undefined.
Oh, does Wolfram Alpha say undefined?
Yep.
So the Google calculator says 1. My calculator on my phone says 1. Things vary. I've heard of calculators even saying 1 or undefined.
Oh, well, that's fair.
And I mean, like, that is probably the most correct answer.
Or minus 1.
What?
Surely if you can say 1, it can say minus 1. Or 0 just as much. Rather, not minus 1, 0.
No.
By applying the other rule.
No, it can't say 0, because remember, with my explanation back there, if you look at the graph of x to the x, as you approach 0, it's the graph intersects the y-axis at 1.
Oh, yes.
So it has to be 1 or undefined, or in the general sense, it is undefined. So I'm sure there'll still be people arguing with me about this, because it's a thing that no matter how many times MathsTube points this out, people are still like, it's equal to 1. And like, I assure you, it's absolutely not equal to 1. It's undefined unless you heavily caveat that statement. Anyways, that is all I have to say on that. I'm sorry if that was fierce long-winded. It's very hard to talk through maths without an example.
No, that was class.
I don't know about that, but anyways, hopefully the video and the and Wolfram Alpha and all will help make it clear for people. All right, Green Room. The only thing I wanted to talk about in Green Room, not much has been happening in my life, so there's very little to discuss. I've been wanting to get back into reading again, Bill.
Okay.
Because I read a ton, like an absolute ton, but it's all Artifexian related, like it's all dry academic works. And I've been like really missing reading just for, reading fiction just for pleasure. And a patron recently pointed out that they were kind of sad that like the unofficial book corner that was going for a while when I was listening to audiobooks kind of disappeared. And I thought about it, I was kind of like, yeah, actually that actually is a bit sad that we don't discuss books as much these days. So I was wondering, would you kind of like want to start a bit of a like Artifexian book club?
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea I thought was that we'd kind of decide on maybe a book that we could both read. No obligations. You don't have to if you don't want to, obviously. But we decide on some sort of book that one of us or both of us are going to read, and then people can read along at home if they want. And then eventually we discuss said book on the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. To start the ball rolling, I was wondering, would you be interested in rereading one of China Miéville's novels, perhaps, for maybe next month? Because I have always wanted to get into it based on your recommendation. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to force me to sit down and read fiction and to read a work of fiction that I really want. And you already enjoy this author anyway, so I think it might be a good first step.
Or at least I did 6 or 7 years ago. I haven't read him in quite a while, so...
Well, would you then be interested in rereading it?
Yeah, sure.
Ah, cool. Okay, so can you recommend one of his books to me for reading?
Do I have to do it now?
I mean, ideally, because if someone else wants to read along, they should know what we're going to read.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, I'm gonna have a quick look over what is over his bibliography.
I'm going to get out my pen and paper here, take some notes. Bit of ASMR for people while Bill's looking.
I'm going to suggest 3 and tell you roughly what I remember about like what each of them is broadly about, and let you pick. So there's Pedido Street Station, which is in his kind of really sort of weird fantasy, sort of dystopian steampunk fantasy, kind of. That's one. The other one I'm going to suggest is The City and the City, which is a kind of very, very peculiar Kafka-esque murder procedural.
Class.
And there's Embassy Town, which is a science fiction about language.
Oh, now, so I was originally going to say that the one that stuck in my memory from years ago was Perdido Street Station, but Embassy Town sounds like it would hit all the right points for the Artifexian podcast. I mean, like, we're going to read a book about language. Like, people are going to be interested in that, I think.
It does. It ticks all the thematic boxes, doesn't it?
Shall we set Embassy Town?
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Let's set Embassy Town. So readers, if you go pick yourself up a copy of Embassy Town by China Mieville, I'll leave a link in the show notes so you can check it out. And read along if you want, and then hopefully next month, Bill and I will spend the green room talking about it. Do not hold me to that, because there are some months where I'm so bogged down in the Artifexian reading that I might get a chance. Eventually, we will discuss these things. Yeah?
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all I have. So, do you want to call it a day before your phone dies and Skype cuts off?
Let's do that.
All right. Sorry. To all the patrons, thank you for supporting the show. To all the listeners, thank you for listening to us. There is no new merch, as we already said, but there is still the old merch available. So go check out the store. Links in the description. Thank you all so much for listening and patronizing. And until next time, Edgar
out.